I regretted bringing my mother, Chain, to this restaurant today. Her expression was cold, her eyes distant, reflecting some faraway place as if nothing was really there. I couldn't shake the feeling that her heart wasn't with us in the moment. It was frightening, more so than when the darkness closed in around her vision and she finally went completely blind. She had once told me, almost cheerfully, that she felt strangely relieved when her sight fully vanished. Before that, she had nightmares about going blind. She'd wake up, thinking it was all just a bad dream, only to realize that reality was no different. Her field of vision had been steadily narrowing until those terrifying moments became her everyday life. Just hearing about those times is painful. She had aspired to be a professional oil painter since high school. Her days were spent at an art academy, preparing for college, with her hands always covered in paint. She poured herself into her work, passionate and hopeful. The day she passed her university entrance exams, everything seemed to be falling into place. She celebrated with friends, returning home that night full of dreams and excitement. But then, a car ran a red light and struck her. Although the initial hospital visit showed no major injuries beyond some scratches and bruises, things took a devastating turn a month later. Her vision began to blur. At first, she blamed it on fatigue, but it grew worse. After visiting a small clinic, she was immediately referred to a university hospital. Traumatic cataract, they said. It was a consequence of the accident. Wider eyes, she thought. Anything else would have been easier to bear. She threw herself into painting with even more desperation, trying to cling to her passion before her vision was completely taken from her. 3 months later, she lost her sight entirely, plunged into a world of darkness. She was devastated, but you'd never guess it now with how bright and optimistic she seems. She would later joke that she even attempted suicide during those darkest days. But then she met my father, and they got married. I was born soon after. She once told me, "I became strong because of your father, Mike, and because of you and your sister, April." Blindness didn't break her. In fact, she made a promise to herself that no one would ever look down on her, her husband, or her children because of it. She worked hard to be the best mother and wife she could be, cooking, cleaning, teaching, and disciplining us, all while navigating the challenges of her blindness. She never hesitated to ask for help when needed, always finding ways to manage. When April, 3 years younger than me, was bullied at school, Mom went to confront the issue alone, despite the stigma surrounding her disability. She later became an active member of the PTA and won the respect of her neighbors and other parents. Even after we had graduated, her strength never wavered. I was too embarrassed as a teenager to express how much I admired her, often complaining about trivial things like the lunches she packed for me. But deep down, I respected her. She had gone through so much, yet she remained strong and cheerful. I grew up healthy and pretty ordinary, but I always believed I had inherited my mother's strength. Whenever I remembered that, I felt like I could do anything. I heard stories about Chad, a guy from the baseball team, having a crush on Luna during high school. I was too busy with work and studies to get involved in those things. But when April dreamed of becoming a news anchor, our family pulled together to send her to a prestigious private school, even though it was a financial strain. I didn't care much for private schools myself, so I attended a public high school while working part-time at a diner to save money for college. About 6 months into my job, Chad started hanging around the diner. He was loud, obnoxious, and disruptive, always there with his friends. Despite repeated warnings from our manager, Max, he wouldn't stop. At first, I didn't understand why he kept smirking at me until Luna approached me one day. "I like you," she said, handing me a letter with a heart on it. Chad's behavior suddenly made sense. Luna's confession didn't interest me, though. I tried to turn her down as gently as possible, but she burst into tears and ran off. That's when Chad's harassment escalated. He began tormenting me at school, messing with my textbooks, and constantly getting in my way. I knew his family was wealthy, with both parents holding executive positions, and that he had private tutors helping him maintain his grades. I didn't want to give in to the bullying or report him, so I chose to channel my focus into my studies. It became my way of resisting. In hindsight, I thought that if I could outshine Chad academically, maybe he would stop bothering me. It was a tough notion to live by, and as a consequence, Chad resented me even more. However, I ended up gaining enough academic success to choose any university for my undergraduate studies. Despite the options, I chose to attend a local state university. By then, Chad's presence had diminished, and rumor had it that Luna had found a new love interest at her own university. Peace returned to my life, and I started enjoying my studies, expanding my horizons. College felt like a breath of fresh air, each day opening up new perspectives for me. After using my high school savings for graduate studies, I landed a job at a research institution. It wasn't a glamorous job, but I was proud. I started a little later than most of my peers, but I wanted to treat my parents with my first paycheck to ease their concerns. My sister, April, had recently become a local TV announcer and had already taken our parents out to celebrate her success. So I felt it was only fair that I do the same. The restaurant we chose held special meaning. It was the very place where my dad had first met my mom. I had always dreamed of taking her there, and now it was finally becoming a reality. On the day of the dinner, however, an emergency business meeting pulled my dad away, leaving just my mom and me. As we walked arm in arm, she joked, "Next time, you should take me to the Caribbean Sea." I laughed and assured her that one day I would. When we arrived at the restaurant and took our seats, my mother asked, "What's this place like?" I described the ambience to her, the warm lighting, the decor, the attire of the staff, and the sparkling chandelier. I didn't know if it matched her memories, but I tried to paint the scene for her as vividly as possible. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a familiar voice. "Mike, long time no see." It was Chad, dressed in an expensive suit, who slid into the seat meant for my father. He immediately began boasting about his life. He had attended a top university and landed a prestigious job, thanks to his parents' connections. As he prattled on, I couldn't help but think about the cost of elite education. For some people, life seemed like an easy ride where success came with minimal effort yet generous rewards. "What about you, Mike? Still working part-time at that diner?" Chad asked with a sneer, trying to usurp the old high school hierarchy. I kept my composure and told him about my academic journey and my job in research. I mentioned how I had used my first paycheck to bring my mother to this restaurant as a special treat. Chad smirked. "This place must have been a stretch on your first paycheck, huh? I come here often, but for someone like you, it's a big expense," he taunted. I remained calm but felt frustration bubbling up inside. I wanted him to leave. I was mindful of my mother's silence and I knew I needed to act. "As this is a special occasion, I'd appreciate it if you left. Our meal is about to arrive," I said bluntly. Chad seemed bored with the conversation but turned his attention to my mother. He realized she couldn't see him and, with a smug grin, waved his hand in front of her face. Seeing no reaction from her, his expression turned mischievous and triumphant. "So you're the child of a disabled person," he said, his tone dripping with malice. My anger flared and I was about to raise my voice, but before I could, my mother softly called my name. Chad, not noticing the tension, pulled out a business card and introduced himself. "I'm Mike's high school classmate, Chad. If you have a disability, my company offers support." "Here's my card," he said, handing it to my mother. The insincerity was palpable. My mother remained silent, and Chad continued, "It's sickening how much charity work companies do for people like you. I think people like you are a drain on society. You're not worth living off our taxes. Ever thought the country would be better off if you just disappeared?" I clenched my fists, feeling my blood boil. Just as I was about to ask the staff to have Chad removed, my mother spoke calmly but firmly. "When you hand out your company's card, you represent them. Should I take what you just said as a reflection of their values?" She faced Chad with her sightless eyes, her tone even but filled with strength. Chad retorted, "Wouldn't the world be better if all disabled people just disappeared? There are plenty of them at my company, and it's disgusting. Is this some kind of charity work or what?" I expected my mom to snap back to put him in his place. Instead, she simply said, "It's such a pity to see a young person with so much potential harboring such thoughts." And then she fell silent. "Can't even argue because it hit too close to home, huh?" Chad sneered as he stood up, looking disinterested. "Since it's a special occasion, let me share some advice with you." My mom said calmly, "Tomorrow you'll be called to the executive's office and lose an important job. I may be blind, but I can see your future. It wouldn't be fair not to tell you," she added with a soft laugh. Chad scoffed, dismissing her as delusional, and left, satisfied with having ruined our evening. "Sorry for ruining our celebratory dinner," my mother apologized. "It wasn't her fault. Chad was an old acquaintance of mine, and I should have ignored him from the start, but I couldn't help but be curious. What was that prediction about? I asked. My mom had never said anything like that before, and it didn't seem like something she would lie about. She simply replied, "You'll understand by tomorrow," her voice carrying a weight that made it clear she didn't want to discuss it further. As the dishes began to arrive, I described the colors and presentation to my mom, who was pleasantly surprised by the flavors. Thoughts of Chad slowly faded from my mind as we enjoyed our meal. However, on the taxi ride home, my mother's distant gaze, despite her blindness, troubled me. The next day, during my break at work, I noticed several missed calls from an unknown number. When I called back, Chad's voice came through, but it was different, desperate, almost on the verge of tears. "Is that you, Mike? Please hear me out. I was wrong," he pleaded. It seemed he had gone to great lengths to get my contact information from a classmate. "Please tell your mother I was wrong about yesterday," he continued, his tone panicked. I was confused, but as my mother had predicted, Chad had been called to the executive's office that morning and fired. "I didn't know your mother had such power. This is really bad for me," Chad admitted, his voice trembling. I calmed him down, promising to check with my mother, and ended the call. When I called my mom, she answered after just one ring, as if she knew the call was coming. I told her about Chad's plea, and she quietly said, "I told you so, didn't I?" When I pressed her for details, she revealed that she knew Tom Bryan, the president of Chad's company. "I just reported that his views on people with disabilities are not good for the future of the company," she explained. I was stunned to learn that my mother was actually a shareholder in Bryan's company. She went on to explain that Tom had helped her during a dark time in her life, when she was despairing over losing her sight, and even contemplating ending her life. He had also played a role in connecting her with my father. When Tom was starting his company, there was some trouble, and he asked your father to invest as a way of thanking him for saving me, she said. The shares had been inherited by my mother after my grandfather passed away, and she had no intention of selling them. Then she said, "I'll get in touch. You and Chad come to the same restaurant as yesterday," and hung up the phone. Despite being by my side all this time, her tone was so commanding that she seemed like a different person. After work, I met up with Chad, who looked completely different from the day before. He was visibly drained, wearing a rumpled suit, with no trace of the arrogance he'd shown earlier. We headed to the restaurant, and as we were seated, I saw my mother talking to a man at the table. From the way Chad addressed him, I realized this was Tom Bryan. "Chad, right? I've heard everything," Tom began. "I've done some research on your actions within the company, and I've concluded that someone like you is a risk to our growth. As declared today, you will have to leave our company." Chad, pale as a ghost, realized the decision was final and slumped to the ground. Tom's company had recently launched a project to support people with disabilities, actively creating employment opportunities for them. Employees with biases were seen as a hindrance to the company's goals of fostering synergy and mutual support. Through an internal investigation, it was discovered that Chad had been harassing and verbally abusing employees with disabilities, exploiting their fear of losing their jobs to continue his harassment. When Chad had made that vile comment about the disabled being a burden on society, my mother had realized that if he could say such things to her, he would do the same within the company. I reported him because I believed Chad's presence was not suitable for the company's future growth, she said. While Chad seemed to regret his actions, it was too late. Sooner or later, someone would have spoken up, either from within the company or elsewhere. His father, who had secured the job for him through connections, had also been informed and was furious. Chad would now have to search for a new job on his own, without his parents' backing. "You're still young. If you realize and change now, there's hope. But as you are, you'll face the same issues wherever you go," my mother advised him. After Chad left, my mother, Tom, and I sat at the table, and I unexpectedly ended up hearing stories about her past. "It's hard to believe you're the same Jane who wanted to die back then. You've become strong," Tom said. My mother smiled. "I have children now. I didn't want to remain weak." I was surprised to learn that she planned to join Bryan Company's ventures as an advisor once we were more independent. "I'm looking forward to starting this new chapter in my life," she said, her enthusiasm evident. That day, I enjoyed a lot of delicious food. Even though I didn't feel like I could taste it yesterday, today I could. As I imagined the future, I thought about the Caribbean Sea. I don't know if it will be in 10 or 20 years, but someday, I want to take her there. How will I describe the blue of the sea and the vibrant colors? I hope to become a person rich in expression by then.